Kayleigh pointed me back to a tweet that you had put up roughly 3 weeks into the war with Iran, in which you listed a number of observations from your view as someone who spent years wargaming these scenarios. All of this still reads fresh today as we essentially reset the clock and go back to the beginning of this conflict. Yet both sides are threatening real escalation that would start involving civilian targets. Ilan, is that what's next?
Yeah, I mean, and I think you're right that we are really back to the beginning in many ways. What I argued for, and I did spend years looking at different scenarios and planning for these possibilities at the Pentagon. And when we really looked at what happens at the end of a war with Iran or how it goes, our most central conclusion was essentially this ends up looking a lot like the first Iraq war, going back to the early 1990s, where at the end of it, you're going to have a wounded regime, but it's still there. In some ways, it's weaker, but in many other ways, it's angrier. And then you're just in a new normal where you have instability and bouts of violence, and a war starts every few weeks, or small wars. Maybe it's not full war. Just this is the new normal. And that's absolutely what we're doing. But actually, the one thing I'll say is it's actually a lot worse than what I'd even predicted, because the one big difference is Iran has a lot more leverage over the Strait of Hormuz and has been able to grab that leverage as a result of this war that none of us really anticipated was going to be as effective. We thought they'd be able to try and close it and use it as a tool, but their ability to sustain that leverage and control of it over time has really been a wild card and has made things even worse. So I thought this was a terrible idea from the start. That's what I wrote at the very beginning of the war for precisely these reasons, that there's no positive way to end this in a way that works for the United States. But it really has turned out to be even worse than I thought it would be.
Well, so if there's no positive way to end it, what in your mind is the least bad way?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, we have three options. Again, they're all terrible at this point. And I don't know if any of them are viable, but this is what I would do. I think the least bad way is cut a deal. It's what we tried to do a few weeks ago with the Memorandum of Understanding. It was a bad deal, but it was better than the alternatives because essentially it's financial bribery to Iran, right? How much money are you willing to give them in terms of sanctions relief, in terms of their ability to sell their oil in order to stop this? We thought we'd given them a fair amount. Turns out it wasn't enough. And there's still, I think, such a desire inside of Iran, both because I think a lot of anger because of the way this all started, especially taking out the supreme leader, but also a desire to really humiliate Trump at this point in the US by demonstrating to the world, don't do this again. And I think that any deal that financially has enough incentives for Iran probably doesn't work for Trump because it's too humiliating. The alternative is military options. Put more pressure on Iran, which is what Trump is trying to do right now. That's the purpose of this blockade and now charting to go even further, attacking bridges and infrastructure. The problem is Iran has shown tremendous resilience. The regime doesn't care that much about the population. It's also capable of striking back and causing a lot of problems for the United States, certainly for American partners in the region, for global oil prices. There's no Trump isn't willing to go far enough to actually change the regime. That's not a real option. And so basically there are no good options. Those are your two possibilities.
Let's talk more about oil prices. You mentioned this in your note going back to March, and this is interesting to rewind the clock. 3 weeks into the conflict, you referred to modeling that you did at CNAS with a group of security, energy, and economic experts. The Strait closed 4 to 10 weeks, with 1 to 3 years, you said, required to restore oil production. Once you factor in infrastructure damage, that sends oil from around $65 at the time, you said, to as much as $200 a barrel before settling back into an $80 to $100 range, which we're actually in right now. Do we still have the potential for $200 a barrel?
I think we overestimated how much the market. Well, maybe I would say we underestimated how much the markets were resilient and the ability to build alternative slack.
But if you've got the Houthis threatening to shut down the Red Sea, this could get a lot more intense.
It could, and a lot of the slack that was in the system 4 months ago, things like the strategic reserve in the United States, things like China reducing its demand temporarily. A lot of those mechanisms are gone. If we go back to where we were at the start of the war and it sustains for a while, yes, I think prices could still really explode. The more likely scenario is, again, we're just in this new normal and prices remain elevated at 80, 90, $100 a barrel, still significantly higher than where we were when all this started in February, and we're all dealing with that. So there's the potential for it to get a lot worse. There's also the possibility that we're just in this new normal of 80 to 90. The only positive thing I'll say long term, everybody's already starting to look for alternatives, build alternative pipelines, find other ways to get the oil out. Saudi Arabia is doing that. UAE is doing that. It's going to take some longer for some other countries like Kuwait and Iraq to do that. They're going to have to, that's like 5 or 10 year kind of propositions. But everybody is now going to look for ways to find ways to get things out of the Middle East without going through the Strait. So over time, this becomes less of a tool of leverage for Iran. It's a depreciating asset.
Well, and of course, there's a lot of political sensitivity around oil prices at the moment because of this conflict. But we also have a lot of political sensitivity around this conflict and Israel's role in it. And I wonder what the view from J Street is right now on the Netanyahu government's continued desire to see more change than has been brought to the Iranian regime and Iran's capabilities, especially at a time and in a week in which the U.S. House had more than 100 Democrats vote to restrict aid to Israel this week.
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things about this. First is, I will just say that Donald Trump is a president of the United States and he makes the decisions to take Americans to war. So it's clear Israel wanted this. It's clear Netanyahu convinced him and pushed him forward on that. It's also, at the end of the day, Netanyahu tried to convince Biden. He tried to convince Obama. They said no. Trump did not say no. So at the end of the day, I put the responsibility first and foremost on this whole disaster on Trump. But it's also true that Israel would like us to go further. Netanyahu would like us to go further. A scenario where you have regime collapse and total chaos in Iran is good for Israel because they're not targeting, Israel. But it's bad for us and it's bad for the rest of the region. It's so destabilizing. And then in terms of that vote this week, I do think that was a very important moment. I don't think Democrats are looking to walk away from Israel altogether. But I think what that vote said was we need a whole new way and approach to this relationship. For years, the American approach has been to support Israel on all things, no matter what. That doesn't make sense anymore. We need to treat this country like a normal country and have a normal relationship. We need to walk away from the blank check, and we need to get to a place where, we have a more balanced and responsible policy towards Israel. And that's where I think we would like it to go. And also where we have a place where we can support Israel as a Jewish democratic state and support Palestinians and their freedom and their rights to, a state of their own. That's the kind of policy I think Democrats are going to push for. And that's certainly where J Street is.